Welcome to the Veil of Truth, your gateway to uncovering hidden insights and illuminating mysteries. I'm thrilled you've joined our global community. Whether you're watching from a bustling city skyline or a quiet countryside, we're glad you're here. Globe showing Europe, Africa, so tell me, where are you tuning in from today? Chapter 1, An Invitation. The morning that set everything in motion began with symmetry. Hercule Poirot aligned the knife and fork on his breakfast tray so that their polished handles met at a perfect angle. The teaspoon lay parallel to the saucer. Even the toast surrendered to order beneath his attentive fingers, each slice resting like a card in a careful hand. One might think order a small thing. For Poirot, it was the quiet foundation upon which a noisy world could be judged. Captain Hastings arrived at 9:30, fresh-faced, cheerful, and armed with a newspaper. He paused in the doorway of Poirot's flat, lifted an eyebrow at the meticulous breakfast arrangement, and grinned. "Good old order, eh?" he said. "The papers say it'll be fair weather all week, which is something." "Exactitude," said Poirot, dabbing his lips. "The world is bearable when it is exact. You have a letter for me?" "Post downstairs." "Looked important," Hastings said, rummaging among envelopes before producing one heavier than the rest. It was of thick cream paper, the flap sealed with dark blue wax bearing a crest, a rampant stag surmounted by a crown. The hand was neat and slightly pressurized, as if the writer had weighed each word and then forced it, firmly, into the page. Poirot took the letter and studied it for a long, silent moment. He noticed the faint serration along one edge of the paper, as if cut from a larger sheet, and an impression beneath the crest that suggested it had been sealed twice. He opened it with a paper knife, lifting the flap with delicate caution. "From Sir Lionel Cavendish," he said at last. Or Wetherby Grange. A weekend gathering to celebrate the engagement of his daughter, Mademoiselle Clara. And yet, his brow tightened a fraction. "There is an addendum. Listen, I would be most obliged if you would attend discreetly. A delicate matter requires your expertise. We may speak privately upon your arrival." Hastings's smile widened. "A country house party? Excellent. There'll be pheasant and tennis and all that. And an engagement to boot. What's the delicate matter, do you suppose?" "Something that troubles a conscience or a purse," Poirot murmured. He set the letter squarely beside his saucer, aligning its lower edge with the table's grain. "Sir Lionel is a man of industry, shipyards, motor works, the newer metals. Men of industry have many acquaintances and few friends. When such a man writes the word delicate, it is rarely a romantic delicacy." "Is he respectable?" Hastings asked, the newspaper rustling. "As a pillar is respectable, upright, and sometimes inclined to topple upon those who stand too close." Poirot stood, smoothing an invisible crease from his jacket. "We shall accept." "Splendid!" Hastings exclaimed. "I'll book us on the noon train." "We shall take the one at 12:23, said Poirot. "It will be less crowded by exactly 7 minutes." By the time their carriage rolled north through a patchwork of fields, the sky had settled into a pale, reasonable blue. Hastings attempted a crossword. Poirot, with an expression of benign disinterest, solved 3 clues while examining his cuff. He pretended not to read the article. Hastings tapped twice with a forefinger, "Sir Lionel Cavendish to announce major expansion of Cavendish Works." The tone was admiring, bristling with figures and phrases like strategic consolidation and reorganization of assets. Poirot noted what it did not say: no mention of siblings, only devoted family man and loyal retaining staff. "Funny," said Hastings, glancing over. "I recall hearing of a brother, Henry, is it? Thought there was some old quarrel." "Quarrels are like old hats," Poirot said softly. "They are kept on pegs in the hall for years. One does not wear them every day, but one likes to know they are there." The countryside hurried past in ordered lines, hedges, lanes, a flash of river, until at last the train slid into the station nearest Wetherby Grange. A motor car waited, a long, dark creature with gleaming chrome and the quiet posture of something that can move swiftly without fuss. The chauffeur touched his cap and took their cases. As the car turned onto the lane, the house revealed itself by degrees, first the iron gates with their stag motif, then, beyond a rise, the ashlar facade, pale and composed, finally the glass of a conservatory catching the light like a sheet of water. Wetherby Grange was the sort of house designed to impress without revealing much. Its lawns were clipped, its gravel raked, its urns placed at rational intervals. On the right, the conservatory bloomed under a roof of panes held in a lattice of iron, the sort of structure that would sing at the first touch of rain. Poirot's eyes rested upon it with appreciation and, for a moment, something like foreknowledge. They were met at the steps by a butler of the old school, tall and discreet. "Goddard," he announced himself. "Sir Lionel will receive you in the afternoon room. Your bags will go up at once. If you desire refreshment after your journey, Mrs. Drew can provide tea." "Merci, Monsieur Goddard," Poirot said. "We are well." He glanced at a stand in the hall where a pair of walking boots left a little rime of dried mud. "The countryside is inviting." "Wet underfoot in the lower meadow, sir," said Goddard without looking. "A storm last night. The conservatory roof holds it well, but there's a drip from the south seam we're seeing to." Hastings's eyes shone. "A proper house, Poirot. Smell that polish. You could skate along these floors." Poirot smiled. "Pray do not try." They were shown through a succession of rooms which seemed to alter their character by inches, first the comfort of leather and book spines, then a lighter drawing room with a blush of flowers, and at last an afternoon room that took its light from a tall window facing the lawns. Here Sir Lionel Cavendish awaited them. He was a broad man, not tall, but solid as a bulldog, with a square head and eyes that had learned command by practice. There was something too deliberate in his cordiality, as if hospitality were a task one did stoutly because one could afford to. He extended a hand like a paperweight. "Monsieur Poirot," he said. "Delighted. And Captain Hastings, I presume." "Goddard, see to their comfort." "Sit, sit." "I trust the journey was tolerable." "It was exact," Poirot said, which pleased him more than it did Sir Lionel. Sir Lionel's mouth tightened, then relaxed. "Well, you see the thing, we are a small party this weekend, family, close associates. You will find them, I think, representative. My daughter, Clara. Her fiancé, Edward Blake. My secretary, Miss Winthrop. Dr. Lydia Marsh, who keeps an eye on our health. And," he paused a fraction, "my brother, Henry." "Ah," said Poirot, mildly. "I will not press you now," Sir Lionel continued. "We are to have a pleasant time, you understand? No alarms. But there is a matter, pestilential, a nuisance, that calls for tact. We shall speak after dinner. For the present, I beg you to rake your eyes over us and see what you see. Do it quietly. Clara is young. We do not want unpleasantness." "You wish me to observe," Poirot said. "That I can do with great discretion." Sir Lionel nodded once. "Good. You'll find Clara in the conservatory with the piano. She insists the room has a better tone, though the rain rattles it. Miss Winthrop is somewhere materializing a new schedule. She lives upon schedules. Dr. Marsh arrives this hour. Henry is," he allowed his mouth to become a line. "Henry will appear when he chooses." As they rose, the door opened to admit a young woman with dark hair gathered neatly at the nape and the kind of steady gaze that suggests she has chosen to be steady. She held a sheaf of papers to her chest with one hand and a black fountain pen in the other. Miss Winthrop, Sir Lionel said. Monsieur Poirot and Captain Hastings. She inclined her head. A pleasure. Her voice had a clipped, even quality. The pen settled into the pocket of her jacket with a small, familiar motion that suggested it often found its way there, like a bird to a perch. Sir Lionel, your telegram has been sent. The solicitors have confirmed Monday's appointment. Excellent, Sir Lionel said. You will see our visitors settled. Miss Winthrop led them towards the conservatory. As they walked, Poirot had the impression of a woman whose order matched his own, though hers seemed forged by necessity rather than nature. The carpet swallowed their steps. Through the glass doors, the conservatory spread. The warmth of damp earth met a hint of Polish, somewhere, water ticked. In the far corner a grand piano lifted its lid like a black wing. Clara Cavendish sat at the keys, her profile turned to the light. She played a phrase with the ease of someone thinking about something else. At their entrance she smiled, rose quickly, and came forward. She was slender, with hands a little ink-stained, as if she had lately sealed a letter or annotated a score. Monsieur Poirot, she said. We are honored. Father admires you greatly. He will not say so to your face, of course. Then he is a man of sense, Poirot said, with a little bow that made her laugh. You play with feeling, mademoiselle. With too much force, according to Mrs. Drew, Clara replied. She says I bring down the roof. It is she who keeps the plant pots from toppling when it rains. A man stepped from behind a palm with a smile that did not reach his eyes. Edward Blake, he said, offering a hand. He was pleasant-looking, with fair hair and a good suit that had seen a careful pressing. A thread at one cuff had worked loose and been tucked back. An honor to meet you, Monsieur Poirot. Clara has said. He hesitated, looked at her, and corrected himself. We are very pleased you could come. Your servant, said Poirot. And your future husband, Mademoiselle Clara, he is prudent. That is a compliment. Edward colored slightly and withdrew his hand, which had been held a shade longer than courtesy required. Poirot had felt, in the handshake, the faint tremor of a man who spends a little too much time looking at bills and deciding which to pay. Miss Winthrop made a small mark in the margin of her papers. I'll see to the luggage, Miss Cavendish, she said, and moved on. I am glad you play in here, Poirot remarked, drifting towards the piano. The glass, it gives a curious resonance. And yet it tells the truth. No? He looked down. A corner of torn music peeped from beneath the stool, caught as if it had tried to escape and been pinned by a leg. He stooped, freed it, and set it on the music stand with the other sheets. How odd, Clara said. I thought I had put everything straight. Perhaps the wind carried it. Her smile thinned and returned. Will you join us for tea? Mrs. Drew will be quite offended if you do not demolish her scones. Later, if I may, said Poirot. He tapped the edge of the music with a finger and then stepped back, as if measuring the silence. For now, I will leave you to your Schumann. As they returned to the hall, the front door opened to admit a figure with dust on his shoes and a hat set at a defiant tilt. He paused, as if surprised by the brightness of the interior, and then let the hat slide from his hand to Goddard's with a mixture of carelessness and resignation. Henry Cavendish, he said to the world. His voice had the softness of someone who has spoken too loudly in the past and learned the cost. He looked at Poirot, took him in, and smiled without warmth. I see my brother has acquired a detective. How very like him. Acquired? Poirot murmured to Hastings after Henry had swept on. Like a vase. Hastings scratched his jaw. He looks as if he's come to fight somebody. Or to stop fighting at last, Poirot said. It is difficult to know which makes the sharper face. Behind them, Goddard closed the door with the quiet authority of a man who has closed many doors upon many tempers. Outside, the sky had altered subtly, as if some hand had smudged the edges of the fair weather. Even in the conservatory a single creak ran along the ribs of the glass. Poirot, standing very still in the middle of the polished floor, felt the house breathe in. He lifted Sir Lionel's letter from his pocket and read again the line about a delicate matter, the readable pressure of the ink. Then he folded it, precise, and slid it away. "We shall observe," he said, almost to himself. "We shall be very quiet. And we shall listen for small things that speak loudly." Chapter 2: The Gathering. The guests of Weatherby Grange assembled, as though summoned by some invisible conductor, in the drawing-room at 6:30. The evening sun slipped through tall windows, filtering amber and gold across the carpet, while a fire flickered in the grate with the self-assurance of an old friend who refuses to be dismissed by the season. It was a room of symmetry and deliberate taste, gilt-framed landscapes upon the walls, polished mahogany tables set at precise intervals, a mantel clock that ticked with unwavering composure. Poirot, seated upright in a wing chair, regarded the room with discreet satisfaction. It was not opulent in the vulgar manner, nor did it indulge in eccentricity. Everything was placed with care, though Poirot, whose eyes measured angles as instinctively as some men drew breath, noted that one painting hung fractionally lower than its neighbor. He resisted the urge to summon a footman to correct it. Hastings, beside him, leaned forward with boyish anticipation. "There's a fine company here, Poirot. You'll see, they'll have partridgey, or perhaps lamb, followed by a proper trifle. And the billiard room looks splendid. I've half a mind to challenge Blake later." Poirot smiled indulgently. "You see food, games, and diversion. I see the arrangement of personalities." He tilted his head towards a pair by the window. "Observe, Mademoiselle Clara, the bride-to-be, speaks to her fiancé, Monsieur Edward Blake. Do you notice how she leans close, her voice low, as though to reassure him? And yet his eyes, they flicker, back and forth, towards the door. He awaits judgment, or perhaps escape." Edward Blake was indeed ill at ease. Though well-dressed, his suit carried a faint air of hire rather than ownership, and the restless tap of his shoe against the carpet betrayed nerves. Clara, however, shone with a steady composure that seemed almost maternal. She placed a hand upon his wrist as if stilling a child, her dark eyes gentle but firm. Across the room, a rustle of papers announced the presence of Miss Winthrop, Sir Lionel's secretary. She sat at a small side table with a notebook poised, her pen tracing figures in neat columns. Now and then she adjusted her spectacles and murmured to herself. Her concentration was so complete that she seemed impervious to the conversation swirling about her, though Poirot noticed her ears tilt subtly whenever Sir Lionel spoke. Sir Lionel himself dominated the hearthrug. He stood with the stance of one accustomed to command, feet braced, hands clasped behind his back, his voice a gravelled instrument tuned to the pitch of authority. He spoke with Dr. Lydia Marsh, who had arrived not long before, her medical bag discreetly set down beside a chair. Dr. Marsh was a woman of perhaps 40, with sharp features softened only by the calmness of her gaze. She listened to Sir Lionel with patience, occasionally interjecting a cool, precise phrase. There was nothing flustered about her, nothing left to chance. It was into this balance of personalities that Henry Cavendish entered. His arrival was marked not by noise but by the sudden tightening of atmosphere, as though invisible strings had been pulled taut. He sauntered across the carpet with a careless grace, his jacket slung over one shoulder, his mouth already bent in a half-smile that carried no warmth. "Brother," Sir Lionel said, his tone clipped. "You have decided to join us." Henry gave a mock bow. "Family duty, Lionel. It would not do to miss Clara's engagement. Besides, you would accuse me of cowardice if I remained away." His eyes swept the room, resting briefly on Clara with something that might have been genuine affection, before sliding towards Edward Blake with an ironic lift of the brow. Clara stiffened, and Edward flashed crimson. Poirot's eyes narrowed, catching the unspoken challenge in Henry's look. Rivalry of some kind, perhaps financial, perhaps more personal. The butler, Goddard, entered with quiet dignity. "Dinner is served." They filed into the dining room, a long chamber whose central table gleamed with silver and crystal. Poirot admired the symmetry of the place settings, the folded napkins standing like small pyramids. The company arranged themselves as etiquette dictated, Sir Lionel at the head, Clara to his right, Poirot on his left. Hastings, with obvious delight, found himself opposite Dr. Marsh. Henry sat further down, his expression one of amused detachment, while Miss Winthrop occupied a modest place near the end, pen still tucked in her pocket as though it might be summoned at any moment. Conversation began lightly, though with an undercurrent of strain. Sir Lionel toasted his daughter's engagement with words that were proud but edged, as though approval had been granted rather than freely offered. Clara responded graciously, her smile unwavering. Edward stammered through a few phrases of gratitude, his voice faltering. Henry, with a sly twinkle, raised his glass and remarked, "May the union bring as much prosperity as it does affection." It was a toast that landed like a pebble in still water. Edward shifted uncomfortably, and Clara's smile became fixed. Poirot's eyes lingered on Henry, noting the calculated pause before he drank, the satisfaction that glimmered as he observed Edward's discomfort. Miss Winthrop spoke little, but Poirot observed her carefully. She declined the wine, sipping only water, and once or twice her hand moved instinctively to her pocket, fingers brushing the outline of her pen. Her gaze rested often on Sir Lionel, who barked occasional instructions to Goddard or corrected trivial matters with brusque authority. She nodded at each remark as if making mental notes. Dr. Marsh, by contrast, maintained an equanimity that might have been professional armor. She answered questions about health with gentle precision, noting the strain of modern life, the dangers of unchecked ambition. Her eyes flicked once towards Sir Lionel as she spoke the last phrase, and Poirot, ever attentive, stored away the detail. Hastings, blissfully unaware of undercurrents, enjoyed his soup with enthusiasm. He attempted to draw Edward into conversation about cricket, only to be met with distracted monosyllables. "Not much of a batsman, I dare say," Hastings whispered to Poirot later. Poirot merely smiled and tapped a finger against his temple. The courses proceeded, the clink of cutlery and the rustle of silk punctuating the strained civility. Poirot contributed politely, his mind busy weaving threads. Why did Clara so often intercede when her father's tone sharpened? Why did Edward's hand tremble slightly as he lifted his glass? Why did Henry smile at moments when others grew silent? And why did Miss Winthrop's pen seem such a constant companion, as if she feared to be separated from it? At last dessert was served, a rich trifle that caused Hastings to beam, and the company withdrew once more to the drawing-room. Sir Lionel, satisfied with the performance of dinner, allowed himself a measure of brandy. He gestured towards the conservatory. "Clara, my dear, will you not play for us? The piano has been neglected since luncheon." Clara obliged, rising with quiet grace. Edward followed, his hand resting lightly at her elbow, though Poirot observed the tension in his grip. The party drifted after her, and soon the conservatory filled with the fluid strains of Schumann. Rain, sudden and insistent, began to drum upon the glass roof, blending with the music in curious counterpoint. Poirot stood apart, near a row of orchids, watching. The light caught Clara's face as she played, a portrait of composure. Yet now and again she faltered, glancing sideways at Edward, who whispered something urgent. Henry, half hidden among the palms, lounged with a smirk that spoke of secrets. Miss Winthrop sat with notebook open upon her lap, pen in hand as though she might record even this performance. Dr. Marsh closed her eyes, listening intently, while Sir Lionel, brandy glass in hand, regarded the scene with satisfaction edged by suspicion. And Poirot, observing all, folded his arms and let his gaze wander from face to face. The music rose, the rain hammered, and the faintest unease crept into the air like a draught through a hidden crack. Something was stirring beneath the gracious surface of Weatherby Grange. Poirot leaned towards Hastings and murmured, "Mon ami, you wished for partridge and trifle. You shall have also intrigue, resentment, and perhaps, who knows, danger. Regard them well, for each one plays a note in a composition not yet finished." Hastings frowned. "Dash it all, Poirot, you talk as if we're already in the middle of one of your cases." Poirot's eyes gleamed as the storm rattled the panes above. "Non, Hastings. We are only at the overture." Chapter 3, Uneasy Shadows. The storm came with a suddenness that startled even the seasoned timbers of Weatherby Grange. Rain, driven hard from the west, slashed across the gardens and battered the conservatory roof until the glass shivered with each blow. Inside, Clara Cavendish's piano notes wavered beneath the tumult, sometimes lost entirely in the rattle of the storm. Poirot, who had taken a seat near a cluster of palms, tilted his head to listen. He was less interested in Schumann than in the interplay of expression across the listeners' faces. Sir Lionel, ensconced in a broad wicker chair with his brandy in hand, closed his eyes in outward pleasure yet twitched his foot at each imperfect note. Edward Blake hovered behind Clara, leaning close to murmur a phrase that made her stumble over a chord. Henry Cavendish, half hidden in shadow, reclined with a smirk that seemed tuned precisely to Edward's discomfort. Miss Winthrop sat with her notebook resting on her lap, though no words appeared upon the page. She twirled her pen idly, her eyes fixed on Sir Lionel. Dr. Marsh, seated near the door, gazed with professional calm at the storm beyond the glass, her posture one of a woman inured to both tempests and theatrics. Hastings leaned toward Poirot and whispered above the din, "Can't hear a blessed thing. Sounds as if the place is under bombardment." "Nature is a percussionist with little finesse," Poirot murmured. "But listen to the dissonance, Hastings. Not in the music, but in the company." The performance ended with a final crashing chord that the storm swallowed almost entirely. Clara closed the lid of the piano and rose with a smile that was a shade too bright. Edward offered her his arm, and she took it, though Poirot saw her hand tighten as though holding him upright rather than drawing strength herself. "Bravissima," Sir Lionel declared, raising his glass. "If the storm breaks the roof, my dear, it will not be your fault. You played well." His tone suggested otherwise. Clara colored faintly and looked down. Henry chuckled from his corner. "Indeed, Lionel, it would be hard to blame her for the weather. Perhaps you should try?" The air tightened, and Edward's jaw stiffened. Sir Lionel ignored the remark and rose heavily. "It grows late. Tomorrow, Clara, you will play something less martial. Good night to you all." He drained his glass, set it on a small table, and left the conservatory with the tread of a man who expected the world to part before him. The party began to disperse. Dr. Marsh excused herself with a nod. Miss Winthrop gathered her papers and slipped quietly away, her pen once more finding its place in her pocket. Clara and Edward lingered by the piano, speaking in hushed tones. Henry stretched like a cat and strolled toward the door, pausing to watch them with amused disdain. Poirot remained where he was, fingertips pressed together, eyes half closed. At last he stood. "Come, Hastings. The storm is heavy, but it will pass. And something tells me the true thunder has not yet broken." The morning came pale and clean, as though the night storm had scoured the sky. Poirot descended to breakfast with the crisp precision of a man whose moustaches had survived the gale untarnished. Hastings joined him over eggs and bacon, remarking that he had never heard rain so fierce. "Yet the glass held," Poirot said, buttering his toast. "Though I am told there is a drip at the south seam. It will be instructive to examine it later." Miss Winthrop entered, her notebook already in hand, and took a modest place at the table. Edward arrived moments later, bleary-eyed, apologizing for lateness. Clara appeared fresh and composed, though her smile was more subdued than the day before. Henry sauntered in last, whistling, his clothes hinting at a late night spent in less than reflective pursuits. Sir Lionel did not appear. At length, Goddard approached Miss Winthrop with a discreet bow. She rose at once and left the room. A few minutes later she returned, her face pale, and spoke swiftly to Dr. Marsh, who rose without hesitation. It was Hastings who noticed the hush that spread, the way Clara's fork clattered against her plate, the way Edward half rose as though fearing to hear what came next. Goddard returned and bent to Poirot. Sir Lionel is, he does not stir, monsieur. Poirot was already on his feet. The conservatory lay heavy with the scent of damp earth. The rain had left rivulets down the panes, and the air was cool despite the sun pressing through the glass. In his chair, as though he had simply resumed the position of the night before, sat Sir Lionel Cavendish. His head lolled to one side, his eyes closed, the empty brandy glass still upon the table. Dr. Marsh knelt swiftly, examined him, and rose with quiet finality. "He is dead." Clara gave a small cry, stifled by Edward's arm about her shoulders. Henry raised his brows and muttered, "Well, the storm has claimed its toll." Poirot stepped closer. He touched nothing, but his eyes moved with the delicacy of a surgeon's scalpel. The brandy glass was spotless, save for a faint trace of liquid clinging at the base. The lips bore no smear, no fingerprint. The chair itself was unmarked, but Poirot bent to examine the lock upon the conservatory door. It was fastened from within, the key still in place. "The police must be summoned," Dr. Marsh said briskly. "Yes," Poirot agreed. "But before they arrive, permit me to observe." "Suicide, you will say?" "A convenient conclusion, but one that satisfies me not." He gestured toward the glass. "The scent lingers faintly, Farmand, yes? That is not the brandy. And note, the key is here, yet there is another exit." He indicated the small servants' passage at the far side, half obscured by pots of orchids. "It is old, little used, but functional. A bolt within, no key." Henry gave a dry laugh. "So you say someone slipped in during the night, poisoned Lionel, and slipped out again? While the storm raged?" "Preposterous." "Preposterous," Poirot said softly, "is only a word until one sees the order beneath the disorder." Miss Winthrop stood rigid, her notebook clutched to her chest. "Sir Lionel was not well of late," she said quickly. "It is not impossible that he—" "No," Dr. Marsh interrupted. "His heart was strong. He had complaints, yes, but not fatal ones." Clara clung to Edward, who muttered broken assurances. Poirot, meanwhile, knelt and retrieved a small scrap from beneath the piano stool, a torn fragment of music, familiar from the evening before. He held it up gently. "Curious," he murmured. "The paper has shifted from its place. What does it tell us?" "That someone moved here, perhaps hurriedly. The smallest things, Miss Amos, they speak the loudest." He straightened, his eyes traveling slowly from face to face, Clara's pale composure, Edward's agitation, Henry's sardonic amusement, Miss Winthrop's stiff control, Dr. Marsh's quiet certainty. Poirot folded his hands. "None, this is not the end, but the beginning. Sir Lionel Cavendish has not died by his own choice. Someone has given death a push." The room shivered with silence, broken only by the steady drip of water at the south seam of the roof. Poirot's moustache bristled with certainty. "We are now in the presence of murder." Chapter 4. The investigation begins. The county constabulary answered Goddard's discreet telephone call with alacrity. By 10 o'clock, a motor car in sober grey had drawn up before the steps, and a brisk man with a square jaw and rain-polished boots was shown to the conservatory. He introduced himself as Inspector Taverner. His manner was competent, his hat was sensible, and his mind, Poirot suspected, would prefer a straight road to a winding path. Taverner took in the glass roof, the ordered ranks of palms and orchids, the chair with its heavy occupant, the brandy glass set just so upon the side table. He sniffed once, frowned, and made a small note. Self-administered poison, most likely, he said. Strong scent, almonds. Door locked from inside. Nobody in or out. Storm masked any sound. We'll have the doctor confirm and my men will see to the formalities. Dr. Lydia Marsh, who had been summoned from breakfast, inclined her head. There is indeed a bitter almond odor, she said, coolly. I will not venture a precise conclusion without further examination. The time of death, provisionally, between midnight and 2. He was very much alive, as you know, when the house retired after the music. Inspector Taverner turned to Poirot. You're Monsieur Poirot, aren't you? I've read of your methods. Trust you won't mind if I keep this simple. By all means, monsieur, said Poirot mildly. Simplicity is the elegance of truth, so long as it is not the laziness of assumption. The inspector coloured, but only a little. We shall begin with what we can see. He gestured to a constable, who occupied himself with tape and notebook. Poirot, with a small bow to propriety, walked the room without touching anything. His gaze moved like a beam of clear light. The key, he observed, sat in the lock on the conservatory door, the scuffed brass showing no new scratch. The little servant's passage at the far end presented a short corridor with a bolt that slid from within. It was now shot home. The windows were latched, the roof high and unwelcoming. Near the south seam, a thin, domestic drip plinked at intervals into a terracotta saucer set beneath a fern. Goddard, Poirot said softly, who placed the saucer? The gardener yesterday afternoon, sir, the butler replied. Temporary measure, until the glazier can attend. Yesterday. Poirot glanced at the damp circle it had made on the slate. And the brandy? Sir Lionel's own, said Goddard. He keeps a decanter in the study and another here. I clean the glasses nightly. Poirot leant, considering the solitary glass. Then this one. Was not one of mine last night, sir, Goddard said, with calm certainty. I cleared every piece before retiring. Inspector Taverner wrote it down, expression neutral. Then Sir Lionel fetched himself a fresh glass later. Perhaps, murmured Poirot. He bent and peered into the glass. Not a smear, not a print. It is very clean. Too clean. A man preparing a nightcap does not polish as he poisons himself. Unless he was a tidy fellow, the inspector said dryly. Ah, said Poirot. He was tidy, yes. But not in this way. Hastings shifted behind him, sympathetic to all parties and none. Looks devilish cut and dried to me, he whispered. Lock place, storm outside, glass inside. If there's a trick, I don't see it. That is why it is called a trick, mon ami, said Poirot. If we saw it, it would be merely a mistake. The house had the stunned hush of a theatre just after the curtain drops too soon. Poirot requested a private room for interviews. Miss Winthrop produced the morning room as if she had foreseen the need. A writing table stood ready, the clock ticked, and the chairs faced one another like polite adversaries. Miss Winthrop first, if you please, said Poirot. She entered with a composure that would not quite hold. Her pen appeared in her hand as if by instinct, then was tucked away again. She took the chair with a stiff back and folded her fingers. Your movements last night, mademoiselle. I retired at 10:30, she said promptly. I had correspondence to finish. There were documents for Sir Lionel's signature, appointment with the solicitors, Monday next. Her eyes flickered. I did not see Sir Lionel again. Yet you rose early, Poirot said gently. Your shoes, they have a little crescent of damp soil at the edge. The garden paths are tidy, but the lower meadow, Goddard tells me, holds the water. Miss Winthrop's chin lifted a fraction. I went to the study at 7 to set out the papers, Monsieur Poirot. I took the outer path, as the main corridor had been waxed and was yet a trifle slippery. The gardener must have tracked some mud yesterday, it transfers, you know, very easily. Mais oui, Poirot said, almost regretfully. Everything transfers, if we are not careful. He let a silence breathe. You declined wine at dinner. Is that by habit? I do not drink when I am working, she replied, surprised. Sir Lionel often asked me to take dictation after dinner. Last night? No. He seemed, she paused, choosing, preoccupied. He drank more brandy than usual. Messy. Poirot's little nod released her. Her retreat had the precision of a drill. Edward Blake, if you please, he said next. Edward entered with the look of a man braced for a blow. He seated himself, then half rose, then sat again, his fingers worrying the brim of an imaginary hat. Your evening, monsieur? Poirot asked, kind. After the music we, Clara and I, remained in the conservatory a few minutes. I told her, he faltered and looked down. It's no matter. We went to the morning room. Talked. Walked the corridor a bit to settle nerves, ours, I mean. I took her to her room just after 11. I went to mine. That's the truth of it. You slept. Not at once. Poirot waited. Edward swallowed. I smoke when I'm on edge. I went down again, thinking to go out by the side door for a few minutes. The rain, good Lord, it was like a sea. I gave up. I did not come past the conservatory. I swear it. Did you hear any sound? The storm drowned everything. You are in debt, Monsieur Blake, Poirot said without accusation. Edward's head jerked. Who told you that? No one. It is written in the thread at your cuff, the nervous eye, the eagerness not to offend. A man under pressure vibrates, like a glass near a violin. Were you on terms with Sir Lionel? I was trying to be, Edward said, bleak. He liked sturdy men who owed nothing. I am not sturdy, and I owe more than I should. But I did not, his breath caught. Clara can tell you, I never left her long. Poirot inclined his head. Courage, monsieur. The truth has a way of finding its feet. When Edward had gone, Poirot said, Henry Cavendish. Henry arrived with a scent of tobacco and rain. He sprawled into the chair, insolent as a schoolboy before a master he does not fear. Your movements? Poirot said. Billiards with myself, Henry replied. Then whiskey with my thoughts. I took them both to the library till past midnight. I looked in upon the study, since you will ask. Lionel wasn't there. I have no taste for brandy in a storm. It feels like challenging God. Did you like your brother? Henry's grin was all teeth. Brother is the word. That is all I shall say. You did not pass the conservatory. No. You disliked Edward. I dislike weakness, Henry said softly. It costs everyone in the end. Poirot did not blink. You went to bed when? 1. Thereabouts. Henry's gaze slid away. Why does it matter? The door was locked. Very little in this world is as it pretends, said Poirot. Dr. Marsh, if you please. Dr. Lydia Marsh entered with her bag, which she placed to one side with an air of setting down argument rather than leather. She met Poirot's gaze without flinching. You saw Sir Lionel yesterday evening, he said. Yes. His health? Stable. No grave diagnosis. He was stubborn with rest and indulgent with stimulants. That is a description, not a cause. He took any sleeping draught. Occasionally. Not prescribed by me. Last night. I do not know. You identify the scent. I do. But you are evasive, Poirot said, very gently. You hesitate when I ask if anything in your professional knowledge would be relevant. Her lips compressed. I hesitate because police work and gossip make poor medicine. Sir Lionel had been under strain. He was considering changes. He valued his reputation and his control. He had conflicts. If you ask me whether someone might profit by his death, the answer in such houses is always several. Merci, Docteur. Poirot stood. You are frank by intention and vague by kindness. She almost smiled. You have a neat way of scolding. Only where neatness is merited. When she had gone, Hastings let out a low whistle. And now Clara. Not yet, said Poirot. We will speak to Mademoiselle Clara last. It is better so. First, we look again at the scene. Back in the conservatory, Inspector Taverner's men had finished their measuring. The inspector himself stood by the door, arms folded. Anything to add, Monsieur Poirot? He asked, not ungraciously. Only small things, said Poirot. But small things are the world. He drifted to the side table. The decanter remained where Goddard had set it. Poirot lifted it delicately by the base with a handkerchief and tilted it near his nose. He frowned, shook his head. No almonds here. So, the poison, if poison it be, was administered not to the bottle but to the glass. Could have poured the draught in first, Taverner said. Could have, said Poirot. He knelt by the drip saucer, gazed at the faint oversplash on the slate. A tiny crescent of mud marred the otherwise immaculate floor, no more than a thumbprint of earth. Nearby, a half-moon of damp had dried to a pale outline, as if something once stood there and had been moved. A plant pot? A stool? He looked to the piano and the tidy line of its feet. He looked to the small torn scrap of music he had rescued, now safer among its fellows on the stand. Hastings, he said without turning, which chair did Sir Lionel favour yesterday evening? That one, Hastings said at once, pointing to the wicker near the south seam. He didn't move when the rain grew loud. Poirot's eyes lifted to the bolt on the servants' passage. The brass showed a fresh polish at the knob, as if a hand unfamiliar with it had hesitated, then pushed home. A faint streak on the jamb suggested someone had wiped at moisture there with a sleeve. He rose, dusting a non-existent speck from his cuff. Inspector, you are content with suicide. I am content with facts, Taverner returned. Locked room. Smell of poison. No sign of a struggle. The simplest answer is usually the right one. Poirot's voice was gentle. And yet, the simplest answer is also the one a clever murderer selects for you to admire. You think this an arranged scene? Mais oui. Poirot looked around, seeing the space as a clock whose hands had been moved carefully to mislead. It is too exact. The clean glass, the key at rest, the bolt that gleams newly beside a drip that fell all night. The paper that slipped and was saved only to slip again. Too many little things point at once to one conclusion. I distrust such zeal. Inspector Taverner grimaced but did not argue. We will wait for the laboratory. In the meantime, nobody leaves. Wise, said Poirot. And now, Mademoiselle Clara. Clara came with quiet step and steady eyes. She sat and folded her hands, and for the first time since morning a tremor crossed her face. Mademoiselle, said Poirot softly, forgive me. I must ask you to recall last night with care. We argued, she said at once. My father and I. He disliked the way Edward whispered at the piano. He disliked, oh, any number of things. He wished to announce new plans at dinner. I asked him to wait. He would not. Her voice steadied. After the music I tried to make peace. He sent me away. You saw him drink? Yes. He said it helped his temper. She smiled without humor. It did not. You fear for Edward, Poirot said. I fear for us all, she replied simply. But yes, Edward most. People mistake his nerves for guilt. Nerves are nerves, Monsieur Poirot. They don't kill men. Sometimes they do, indirectly, Poirot said, kind. You heard anything in the night? The storm. And a footstep once, perhaps. It is such a big house, sounds travel oddly. Which direction? She hesitated. Towards the conservatory, I thought. But the rain, it distorts everything. Poirot rose, and she rose with him. Merci, mademoiselle. You have courage. She gave a small, sad laugh. Courage is only not running away. When she had gone, Hastings said, well. Poirot's eyes were bright and far away. The room tells a story, Hastings. But it is a story edited by someone with a tidy mind and an untidy conscience. It is not suicide. Then who? Poirot's moustaches lifted, almost smiling. We must assemble the petites choses, the fresh polish on a bolt, the soil that is too clean to be accidental, the glass that has been loved by a cloth. When one has the right arrangement, the melody will appear. He glanced up at the trembling seam of the roof where a droplet formed, fell, and formed again. Until then, we listen to the drip, 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 and we wait for the next false note. Chapter 5, Secrets and Lies. The day at Weatherby Grange unfolded beneath a veil of strained civility. The house had taken on that peculiar hush common to households in mourning, though grief itself had yet to settle in. Instead, suspicion and unease floated like dust in a shaft of sunlight, seen only when one looked carefully, but present everywhere. Poirot walked the corridors with his usual neat tread, Hastings at his side. He listened to the creaks of the floorboards, the faint whispers of servants behind half-closed doors, and the muffled arguments that drifted from rooms where guests had retired in private. You've the look of a bloodhound, Poirot, Hastings said, attempting cheer. Though I'd wager this is one case where the thing is as plain as the nose on your face. Sir Lionel, locked door, poisoned glass, what more is there? Poirot stopped, turned with a small sigh, and tapped Hastings gently on the arm. Mon ami, if you see a thing too plain, beware. Truth is rarely bold enough to stride in the open. It dresses in the clothes of accident, of simplicity, to trick the eye. You remember last night's torn sheet of music? Yes. Odd, I suppose. Might have fallen. Precisely. Might have. But why then did I find it first beneath the stool, and again this morning upon the floor, as though it sought our attention twice? A murderer does not leave great footprints, Hastings. He leaves the faintest dust, expecting none to notice. They reached the conservatory, now sealed off by Inspector Taverner's constables. The inspector himself, standing guard like a sentry, frowned at Poirot. You'll make yourself dizzy with all this sniffing around, Taverner muttered. Laboratory report will settle it soon enough. Cyanide, by the smell. Self-administered. That's my line. And yet, Poirot said delicately, if self-administered, where is the draught bottle? One does not conjure poison from the air. Could have tipped the vial into the fire, Taverner said. But you will observe, there is no scorch, no telltale scent among the ashes. No, monsieur. Someone placed it in the glass, and someone else removed the evidence. The question is who? Poirot began anew with interviews, but this time his manner shifted. Gone was the soft solicitude of the morning. Now his questions carried a sharper edge, as though he had grown impatient with polite shadows. Edward Blake came first, summoned reluctantly. He looked worn, his eyes bloodshot, his tie knotted carelessly. "Monsieur," Poirot began, "you love Mademoiselle Clara, yes?" "With all my heart," Edward said at once. "Yet you quarrelled with her father." Edward's jaw tightened. "We did not quarrel. He despised me, that is all." "Despised?" "Strong. He said I was weak, that I was not fit to run a household, let alone stand beside Clara. He said he'd cut her off if she married me." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "Did he now?" "And what did you say?" Edward flushed. "I told him he was wrong. That Clara and I would manage, whatever he did." He laughed. "Oh, I hated him then. But I did not poison him, Monsieur Poirot. I would never." He buried his face in his hands. Poirot watched him for a long moment. "Hatred is not proof, monsieur. Still, it is interesting that you tell me of this quarrel only now. Why not earlier?" Edward faltered. I did not wish Clara to suffer for it." Poirot nodded once, dismissed him, and waited for the next. Miss Winthrop entered briskly, notebook tucked beneath her arm. Her expression was precise, but Poirot detected the tremor at the corner of her mouth. "You worked late with Sir Lionel's papers," Poirot said. "I am told there was a new will." She stiffened. "That is private." "Private to whom?" Poirot asked gently. "Sir Lionel is dead. The law will soon read it aloud." "Did you draft it?" "Yes," she admitted. He wished to make changes. Clara was to be provided for, of course, but much of the estate was to pass into a trust, one I managed. He no longer trusted his brother Henry. He wanted security, order. "And for yourself, mademoiselle." Poirot's voice was mild. Her eyes flickered. "A modest legacy, nothing more." Poirot leaned forward. "And yet the handwriting upon the draft is yours. Did you not fear suspicion, that you might be thought to forge, to alter?" Miss Winthrop's composure broke for an instant. "I would never. I was loyal to Sir Lionel." She swallowed. "Yes, I corrected a phrase or two when his dictation faltered, but the substance was his. If the will had displeased anyone, it would be Henry, or perhaps Edward." "Or you," Poirot said softly. She rose sharply. "I see no need to endure this insinuation." She swept out, leaving the faint scent of ink behind. Poirot called next upon Henry Cavendish. Henry arrived with insolent slowness, a cigarette between his fingers. "You think I killed him," Henry said at once, dropping into the chair. "Say it outright." "I think you had quarrel," Poirot replied. "We quarrelled 20 years. He cheated me in business, stole my share, drove me abroad. Came back when the money ran out. Do you think I hide it? I told him I hated him to his face." "But poison?" Henry exhaled smoke. "Too quiet for me. If I'd killed him, the whole house would have known." "Nevertheless, monsieur," Poirot said calmly, "you inherit little now, if the will is true." Henry barked a laugh. "Then why bother killing him before it was signed? Unless you feared it was already signed." For the first time, Henry hesitated. He stubbed out the cigarette violently. "You'll believe what you like." "I told you, not my style." Poirot's last interview of the afternoon was with Dr. Lydia Marsh. She entered composed, though her eyes revealed a weight she carried with dignity. You examined Sir Lionel's body, Poirot said. What do you find? Signs consistent with cyanide poisoning. The glass reeked of it. You are certain it was cyanide? As certain as one can be without the laboratory. I have smelt it before. Poirot regarded her steadily. You are withholding something. Dr. Marsh's lips tightened. At length she said, Sir Lionel had confided to me a month ago. He feared he was being watched, perhaps blackmailed. He would not give details. He said it was a private matter. I urged him to speak plainly, he refused. Blackmail, murmured Poirot. And yet he invited me, why? Not to save his pride, but his life. Dr. Marsh inclined her head. So it seems. That evening, Poirot walked again through the conservatory, alone. He bent to the saucer beneath the drip. Beside it, faint upon the slate, was the mark of a heel. Not fresh, but not old either. He touched it gently, then straightened, his mind arranging the fragments. The torn sheet of music. The brandy glass too clean. The new will. Edward's debts. Henry's fury. Miss Winthrop's loyalty that trembled into desperation. Dr. Marsh's evasions. Clara's nervous glance toward her fiancé during the storm. Secrets and lies, Poirot whispered. Each one conceals, each one distorts. But the pattern will emerge, always. And then his moustaches twitched with quiet satisfaction, then Hercule Poirot will play the final chord. The conservatory, silent now save for the drip of water, seemed to lean in, listening. Chapter 6, Red Herrings. The rain returned in fine, persistent threads the following morning, drumming gently against the windows of Weatherby Grange. It lacked the violence of the earlier storm but carried a dreary insistence, as though nature had decided to dampen tempers as well as lawns. The house stirred reluctantly, voices subdued, footsteps muffled on the polished floors. Poirot, immaculate as ever, descended the staircase with his moustaches arranged to perfection. Hastings waited in the hall, his expression one of exasperated impatience. My dear Poirot, Hastings began, this business is dragging. The inspector has his mind made up, suicide or at least something near enough, and the others seem determined to make everything more complicated than it is. I can't see why you don't simply point the finger at Blake. The fellow is clearly nervous and indebted. He had motive, opportunity, everything. Poirot lifted a gloved hand. Hastings, mon ami, you are too hasty, as always. To leap upon the most obvious suspect is to fall into the trap the murderer has prepared. Monsieur Blake's anxiety is real, yes, but perhaps it is the anxiety of innocence, not guilt. Consider, guilt often hides behind calmness, while truth trembles. Hastings sighed. Well, if you say so. But I'd lay odds Blake had something to do with it. Poirot smiled faintly and adjusted his tie. You would lose that wager, mon ami. Let us continue to observe. Inspector Taverner called the household together in the drawing-room at mid-morning, ostensibly to keep everyone up to date. Poirot sat quietly, his small form perched on the edge of an armchair, eyes roving. Taverner cleared his throat. The laboratory confirms our suspicion, cyanide, introduced via the brandy glass. No trace in the decanter itself. That means it was placed in the glass deliberately, not self-administered from the bottle. Thus, I am obliged to treat this as a case of foul play. A murmur rippled through the company. Clara paled, Edward squeezed her hand, Henry snorted, and Miss Winthrop's lips thinned as if she had been expecting no less. Dr. Marsh remained impassive. Taverner pressed on. The circumstances remain peculiar. Locked door, no sign of entry or exit. But someone here had both the chance and the reason. I shall have the truth of it. Bravely spoken, Henry drawled. But will you? Lionel was an old tyrant. We all wished him gone at times. You'll find motive enough to fill a library. Perhaps, Taverner snapped. But one of you acted upon it. Poirot's moustaches twitched. He leaned forward, addressing no one in particular. A locked room, a poisoned glass, and too many suspects. It is, as you say in English, the perfect stage. But perfection is a dangerous disguise. It draws the eye and hides the flaws. Henry gave a mocking bow. As ever, the great detective speaks in riddles. Poirot inclined his head serenely. Riddles, monsieur, are but truths wrapped in a small mystery. Later, Poirot sought Clara in the conservatory. She sat at the piano, her hands resting silently upon the keys. The rain's patter filled the silence. Mademoiselle, Poirot said gently, your father, he was a difficult man, was he not? Clara's eyes glistened. Yes. Difficult. Demanding. But he was my father. He wished everything to be done his way, in his time. And yet, she faltered. And yet I cannot believe he is gone. You quarrelled with him on the night of his death. She nodded. Yes. He despised Edward. He said I was foolish to marry him. But I love Edward, Monsieur Poirot. Nothing will change that. Nothing. Poirot studied her. And Edward, he owes money, yes. Clara's hand clenched on the piano. Yes. But do you think? No. Edward may be weak with money, but he is not a murderer. Poirot inclined his head. I do not accuse, mademoiselle. I only note. Truth is often a mosaic, one must place many small pieces before the picture appears. Her eyes searched his face. Then please, Monsieur Poirot, find the picture. Clear Edward's name. Clear mine. We could not bear suspicion. Poirot bowed. I will try, mademoiselle. With order, all things become clear. That afternoon, Poirot wandered into the library, where Henry lounged with a cigar and a glass of whiskey. Books lined the shelves, the scent of tobacco thick in the air. Come to interrogate me again? Henry asked, smoke curling from his lips. Interrogate? No, Poirot replied. To observe, perhaps. You are a man who speaks of hatred freely. Yet hatred, I find, often hides other feelings, envy, regret, even love. Henry's grin was cold. You'll not wring sentiment from me, Poirot. Lionel and I were enemies, plain and simple. I'd no reason to sneak about with poison. If I'd wanted him gone, I'd have put a bullet in his head in broad daylight. Poirot's eyes glimmered. Perhaps. But you knew of the will. Henry stiffened. What will? Poirot spread his hands innocently. Ah, then you did not know. Curious. Henry swore softly and turned away. Poirot let the silence lengthen before departing. The seed had been sown, Henry was rattled, which was information in itself. Miss Winthrop crossed Poirot's path in the corridor, papers clutched tight. He stopped her with a courteous bow. Mademoiselle, a word. You were very loyal to Sir Lionel. Yet loyalty can sometimes twist into fear. Did he know of your corrections to the will? Did he accuse you of overstepping? Her eyes widened. You have no right. Poirot raised a finger. No right, no. But perhaps knowledge. Forgive me, mademoiselle, but your loyalty may have been misinterpreted. Others may think you had too much to gain. Her mouth compressed into a thin line. I gained nothing by his death, she said, and swept away before Poirot could reply. By evening, the household felt like a chessboard upon which too many hands had moved the pieces. Poirot and Hastings sat in the morning room as the rain softened outside. Hastings slumped in his chair. "Well, Poirot, you've stirred the lot of them. But we're no closer to knowing who did it. Every one of them had a reason, if you look closely enough. Blake's debts, Clara's quarrel, Henry's grudge, Miss Winthrop's will, even Dr. Marsh's evasions. I dare say we could toss a coin and be as certain." Poirot wagged a finger. "No, Hastings. That is the trick of the murderer, to scatter suspicion so widely that we think truth cannot be found. These are red herrings, mon ami. Shiny, slippery, diverting, but herrings all the same. We must look not at what they tell us, but at what they avoid. Red herrings, eh?" Hastings said thoughtfully. "Well, I never did like fish." Poirot smiled. "Then let us prepare for the meat of the matter. Somewhere among these false trails lies a single thread of truth. And I, Hercule Poirot, will follow it to its end." He leaned back, eyes half closed, listening to the rain's diminishing patter. The household played it calm, but beneath the surface current swirled dangerously. Poirot knew, before long, the murderer's mask would slip. Chapter 7. Poirot reflects. The day began in a hush, a soft grey veil laying over lawns that still remembered last night's rain. Poirot took the air alone, gloves immaculate, had set at a precise angle as if to persuade the weather to conduct itself. He walked the perimeter of the conservatory first, tracing the line where glass met brick, eyes half closed in the manner of a man listening to music. A ladder leaned against the south side. A gardener in a coarse jumper, Mr. Lowe, as Goddard informed him, adjusted a narrow length of lead flashing with a small hammer. "You are mending the seam, monsieur?" Poirot asked. "Trying to, sir. Little leak. 'Twas only a drip till last night made it lively." He nodded toward the inside. "We put a saucer down yesterday, just to spare the floor." "Ah yes, the saucer." Poirot peered through the pane towards the terracotta disc beneath the fern. "And did anyone touch it this morning?" Mr. Lowe scratched his cheek. "It were a fraction out o's place first thing. About a finger's breadth. Could be the maid bumped it with a broom. Could be the drip moved it. Hard to say." Poirot's gaze drifted to the earth by the conservatory's outer door. The prints there were muddled by the storm into a general bruise, but near the threshold a fresher scuff, half-mooned, cut at an angle across the smear, as if made by someone who knew where they were going and did not hesitate. "Merci," Poirot said. "You are a man who notices. I value such men." He went inside. The conservatory had that morning after quiet of a stage stripped of actors, props half forgotten in shadow. The saucer still collected an occasional drop from the seam, each plink a metronome. Poirot crouched by it and examined the slate. A crescent darker than its neighbor showed where moisture had pooled. Adjacent lay that same pale outline he had noted before, the ghost of something once stood and then removed. He stood very still. He listened. He looked not at the scene, but through it, as one might inspect the reverse of a tapestry for the knots that made the picture possible. A bolt that gleamed a little too freshly. A smear wiped along a jamb where no hand should have needed to be. A glass so clean it proclaimed its own staging. A scrap of torn music that had needed twice to be found. A drip that measured time. Hastings arrived, hands thrust in pockets. "You're communing with the ferns, Poirot." "With the mechanism, mon ami." Poirot's finger tapped the bolt on the little servant's door. "Observe, it slides easily. With a pull, it sets. With a pull, it could set itself." Hastings blinked. "Set itself?" "In a manner of speaking." Poirot's eyes travelled to the saucer. "A drip is a clock. A saucer is a weight. A thread is a messenger. If one wished the bolt to shoot home after one had left the room, one might enlist the drip to do the work. Hastings gaped. A water-powered lock. Poirot's smile was tiny. Do not think of power. Think of patience. He sent Hastings to the kitchen for a length of cotton twine and, if Mrs. Drew would permit, 2 lumps of sugar. When Hastings returned, indignant from having been told not to touch the currants, Poirot set about his little experiment. He tied the twine about the bolt's knob, carried it round a plant stand so it altered direction without friction, and brought the free end to the saucer. He anchored that end to one of the sugar lumps and set the lump gently on the dry edge of the saucer, its line drawn taut but not tight. "Give me your watch," Poirot said. "We will be empirical." They stood together in the drip's quiet company. Drop. Drop. The water crept under the sugar, darkening it. A little sheen formed, then a slippage as the grain surrendered to solution. At last the tethered lump lost its integrity and slid with a docile plop into the saucer's shallow pool. The line tightened, the bolt, coaxed not by strength but by organization, whispered forward the last half-inch and clicked into place. Hastings's eyes rounded. Good Lord! The storm would have hidden that sound completely. "OUI," Poirot said simply. He loosened the twine, pocketed the soggy experiment, and wiped a single drop from the jam with his handkerchief, leaving a faint streak not unlike the one he had already observed. A mind enamored of schedules would be comfortable with such a device. It is a trick of minutes and margins. "You think Miss Winthrop rigged it?" Hastings blurted. "I think," Poirot replied, "that the mechanism tells me about the murderer's temperament." "Not the name, Hastings, the temperament. There are others in this house who might tie a knot. But who would trust a drip to keep time? Who would find comfort in the idea that a piece of work, once set, will complete itself?" Hastings subsided, chastened. "You and your temperaments." "Psychology is as useful as chemistry," said Poirot. "We must know the hand and the heartbeat." He crossed to the side table and studied the glass once more. No smear, no print, no silly lipstick to lead a dull inspector astray. Beside it, a square of folded linen rested, Goddard's diligence. Poirot lifted it with 2 fingers and smiled. On its inner corner, almost invisible, a blush of brown suggested it had lately been employed to polish something. "Tell me," he said when Goddard appeared at the door, summoned by the bell, "does Miss Winthrop exercise control over the sideboard as she does the schedules?" Goddard remained impassive. "Miss Winthrop sees to many things, sir, when Sir Lionel insists. She was particular about the arrangement of glasses. I clean them, but she straightens. She has a way with lines. If I put 6, she makes them into 2 3s. A way with lines," Poirot repeated. "And with signatures." His tone was mild. Goddard, a discreet man, made no answer, which was answer enough. Poirot left the conservatory and went to the study. The air had the drowsy smell of ink and leather. On the desk, beneath a paperweight in the shape of a stag, a blotter lay ready. Poirot lifted it gently and held it to the light. The mirror image of yesterday's dictation rose ghostly from the fibres, phrases about trusts and trustees, provisions for my beloved daughter Clara, and a sentence begun twice and finished once. The overstruck clause was firm where the rest of the hand wavered slightly, as if the writer had hesitated and another had tided. He placed a sheet of thin paper upon the blotter, took a pencil from his pocket, and shaded delicately. The darker notches became letters. A name repeated 3 times, Sir Lionel's, once with the F downward too straight, as if a careful pen had been too careful. Practice, practice, practice. He replaced everything precisely as he had found it. Poirot did not yet have proof. He did, however, have a silhouette. In the corridor he met Dr. Lydia Marsh. She looked as if she had slept, if at all, only by persuasion. He fell into step beside her. You saw the inspector's report, he said. I did. It troubled no one in the least and everyone very much, she replied. Professionally, I admire a clean conclusion. Morally, I prefer a true one. Just so. He paused. Sir Lionel spoke of blackmail to you. Her mouth tightened. I should not have told you even that. And yet you did, Poirot said. Because you wished me to see what was at stake. You are loyal to truth, not to reputation. He inclined his head. Permit me one more indelicate question. The scent of bitter almonds that was so strong last night, you noticed it elsewhere, before the body was discovered. In the conservatory, she said after a beat. Faintly, under the rain. On any person? No. Messy. He gave her a small bow that carried more weight than its size suggested. In the afternoon he asked Mrs. Drew for a cup of tea and was rewarded not only with tea but with information. The housekeeper, stout and indignant at crime under her roof, told him who came and went with the steadiness of a ledger. Miss Winthrop, early to the study, Mr. Henry, late to bed and cross in the morning, Mr. Blake, wandering corridors like a lost soul, Miss Clara, up before 8, eyes red but head high. She keeps her ink in her room, Miss Clara does, Mrs. Drew added, apropos of nothing and something. Writes letters first thing. But she's tidy. Doesn't leave a smudge. Tidy, Poirot murmured. The word had become a theme, as persistent as the drip had been. He took another walk in the gardens as the light dwindled. The air smelt of wet leaf and iron. He found, half hidden along the outer wall of the servants' passage, a snag of cotton caught upon a thorn. He lifted it delicately. It could have been anyone's. It lay, however, exactly where a hurried hand might have brushed while slipping away during a storm. He tucked it into his pocket with a soggy sugar string. Artifacts, yes, but only meaningful in arrangement. By evening the house had retreated into rooms where lamps made little islands of safety. Hastings found Poirot in the morning room, hands clasped behind his back. Well, Hastings said, your little experiment was a marvel. But we've proof of nothing, and they're all still glaring at one another like cats over cream. Poirot's gaze was serene. Proof is born from the marriage of fact and form, Hastings. We have facts, a glass too clean, a bolt too polished, a drip convenient to an idea, a study blotter with more conviction than its master's hand, a secretary who corrects as she serves, a brother who performs his hatred rather than hides it, a fiancé whose nerves speak louder than his will, a daughter who is calm when others would scream, a doctor who is honest enough to stop short of harm. And the form? Hastings asked. The form will be the gathering, Poirot said. We will draw the pattern in front of their eyes and find who cannot bear to see it. He smiled, a small, satisfied smile that contained no triumph and much certainty. Tomorrow, perhaps. Or the day after, when the inspector has grown impatient enough to make a false arrest. It is always useful, that moment. Hastings groaned. You'll let him arrest Blake, won't you? Poirot's look was tender and amused. Non, mon ami. I will not let a good man's nerve send him to prison so that a tidy conscience may rest. Order must be restored. It is my vocation. He moved to the window. Beyond the glass, the conservatory's panes held a dim reflection of lamps and faces, the theatre awaiting its final act. The drip had ceased, Mr. Lowe's hammer had done its honest work. But Poirot still heard a small sound, imagined or remembered, the click of a bolt sliding home at a murderer's careful command. Red herrings, Hastings, we have had in plenty, he said softly. Now we will fillet the truth. Chapter 8, The Revelation. The morning broke brighter than any since Poirot's arrival. Sunlight struck the windows of Weatherby Grange, gilding stonework that had seen door beneath days of storm. Yet indoors, the atmosphere remained taut, as though each occupant held their breath. The inspector had muttered of making an arrest that very day. Poirot, immaculate in grey suit and patent leather shoes, announced calmly after breakfast. "Miss Amos, will you join me in the drawing room? It is time we bring order to disorder." The company gathered reluctantly, each carrying their own shadow of fear. Clara clung to Edward's arm, his hand shook upon hers. Henry lounged in a chair, cigarette alight, a smirk painted too carefully on his lips. Miss Winthrop sat upright, notebook clasped in both hands as if it might shield her. Dr. Marsh stood near the mantel, grave and quiet. Inspector Taverner, blunt and impatient, leaned by the door, arms folded. Poirot placed himself by the long window, back to the light, moustaches gleaming. He surveyed them with the calm of a surgeon who knows where to cut. Sir Lionel Cavendish did not take his own life, Poirot began. He was murdered. And he was murdered with method, cunning, and an attention to detail most exact. I will show you how. A ripple stirred the room. Edward's lips parted, Clara's face paled, Henry gave a low laugh. The locked conservatory door, it impressed you all. Inspector Taverner saw it as proof of suicide. But it was no more than a trick. I have reproduced the method. Poirot lifted from a small case the soggy lump of sugar tied with string. Observe, a thread tied to the bolt, passed around a stand, its end anchored to a lump of sugar placed upon the saucer beneath the drip. As the sugar dissolved, the weight shifted. The bolt slid home of its own accord. Hours after the killer had departed, the door appeared secured from within. Gasps, exclamations. Hastings himself muttered, "Ingenious, by Jove." "Yes, ingenious, and patient," Poirot said. This device required a mind that loved schedules, that trusted the tick of minutes. Who in this house lived by such schedules? His eyes turned to Miss Winthrop. She flinched but recovered quickly, raising her chin. I keep order, yes. But that does not make me a murderer. Patience, mademoiselle. I will show motive as well as method. Sir Lionel had altered his will. He intended to create a trust under your supervision. But you, being zealous, perhaps ambitious, took too much liberty with his dictation. You corrected, you smoothed, perhaps even inserted. Sir Lionel discovered this. He threatened exposure. You stood to lose not only position but honor. And so, you chose to silence him. Miss Winthrop's lips whitened. That is false. Poirot raised a hand. Consider further, the brandy glass. Too clean. Not the casual untidiness of a man pouring his nightcap, but the polish of a hand that tidied after itself. Your hand, mademoiselle. For it is your habit to straighten, to polish, to align. Goddard told me so. Henry gave a sardonic laugh. So it was the tidy one all along. I always said neatness was dangerous. Poirot's gaze flicked to him. Do not congratulate yourself, monsieur. You had hatred, yes. But hatred that trumpets itself is rarely the hand that strikes in secret. You spoke too loudly to be guilty. And Edward, poor Edward, his debts make him look guilty, but he is too clumsy for such subtle contrivances. He wrings his hands, but he does not polish glasses. Clara? She quarrelled, yes, but her courage is not the courage of poison. And Dr. Marsh withheld knowledge of Sir Lionel's fears, but only to protect his reputation. Her loyalty is to her patience, not to deception. Poirot's eyes narrowed, fastening upon Miss Winthrop. No, it is you, mademoiselle. The smallest things betray you. The scrap of music beneath the stool, placed to suggest Clara's presence in the conservatory after all had retired. A false clue. Red herrings, as Hastings would say. The saucer moved slightly, as the drip tightened the twine you had set. The bolt gleamed where you tied your knot. Even the blotter in Sir Lionel's study spoke of your hand, the repeated practice of his signature, pressed too neatly into the paper. Forgery, preparation, and fear. It is you who killed him. The silence was heavy, broken only by the ticking clock on the mantel. Miss Winthrop's pen slipped from her hand and struck the floor with a brittle sound. Her eyes darted about the room, at Henry's amused leer, at Edward's wide gaze, at Clara's horror. At last her shoulders slumped. He left me no choice," she whispered. "He mocked my work. He threatened to ruin me, to call me a thief before them all. I had built everything by order, by exactness. He wanted to tear it down. I only wished to preserve." Her voice broke. Inspector Taverner stepped forward grimly. "That will do, miss." Poirot inclined his head. "Inspector, I give you the murderer." Later, when the constables had taken Miss Winthrop away, Hastings and Poirot walked once more through the conservatory. The storm had passed, the air smelt of wet earth and jasmine. Hastings shook his head. "Dash it, Poirot, I'd never have thought it. Such a quiet, dutiful woman. And all those signs, I saw nothing." Poirot smiled, smoothing his moustache. "That is why murderers like her succeed, mon ami. They know how to make themselves invisible. But even the invisible leaves traces. A heel mark, a smudge, a string tied too precisely. Murder is never neat, however tidy the murderer wishes it to be." Hastings gave a low whistle. "And all those other things, Henry's hatred, Edward's debts, Clara's quarrel, just red herrings." "Just so," Poirot said. "The truth was smaller, quieter, less dramatic. It hid in the details, where only the eye of order could see." He looked up at the seam of glass where the drip had once fallen. Now the glazier's new strip held firm, and no drop disturbed the silence. "See, Hastings," Poirot murmured, "even the drip has ceased. Order is restored. And Hercule Poirot, once again, is content."